sunlight outside, and it'll still be there when we wrap up today. Got a great session for you today, and way of introduction. It's just looking over Peter's bio, and it reminds me of how fortunate we are on this campus that we are surrounded by really, really, really smart and experienced people. And one of the great privileges we have here in the Center for Teaching Excellence is bringing in the expertise. So Peter has two sides. He is an artist. He is currently the interim assistant chair of the Department of Theater and Dance and head of the Master of Arts and Teaching program in Theater and Dance. He also has his doctorate in education. So he's been living on both sides, both the creative side and the pedagogical side. He does have an MFA in directing for the theater. His EDD is in curriculum and instruction. And his courses focus on arts-based pedagogies, teaching and learning, culturally responsive pedagogy, and applied theater. Before he came to join us here at the University of South Carolina, he was Director of Education at the Irondale Ensemble in Brooklyn, New York, and, like many of our faculty, formerly taught high school, teaching English and drama for a decade in Maine and New Jersey before he joined the Academy. He has also worked as a teaching artist in the New York City Public Schools. So we have a great pleasure to welcome Peter Duffy.
Thank you so much. So you're gonna have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so I'm gonna sound a little grovelly for a while, so apologies. I'll be sipping on tea and try to croak my way through the session. I just want to say as a point of introduction, I don't want to pretend like I have lots of answers around this conversation that we're going to have. It's one that I occupy a lot of thought around, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have like, hey, here are 10 quick and easy steps to having culturally responsive classrooms. Go. It really is a process, and I want to ask some questions with us and do a couple of exercises. It is interactive, but it's not going to be scary interactive, I promise. And hopefully, collectively, we will be able to come up with some ways of making meaning out of these questions that we might not have had the access to before we came here. I'm a firm believer in that what we hold in our heads individually is information, and what we create amongst each other when we share that information is knowledge. And so we're going to be able to construct something unique here and a way of thinking about something here today because of who's in the room, and not necessarily because, you know, I've read 10 books and I'm going to share whatever I know. You know, that's not very informative. So I also want to start kind of with a bit of a problem about this topic, right? Is that the contradiction in this topic is that being a teacher is inherently a position of power, right? That there is an inherent power differential that's baked in. And so I want us to be clear about that from the very beginning. You know, we grade student work. You know, we determine their fate at least within our course, right? And so there is a power differential. That status is not the same. But what we do with that status, I think, is the question that we're going to occupy ourselves with today. All right. So that's kind of the thrust of what we're going to be thinking about. The definition of power that I'm going to be working from today is kind of a standard critical pedagogy definition of power that you'll see a lot, and it's a unitary force, so a one-directional force with uniform results, right? So it's a force in a particular direction so that everything is going to be the same, and that's kind of a definition that's fairly standard in this work. So there are a couple of key questions that we're going to think about. What is power in academia? What are obstacles to sharing power equitably? And how do we share power in ways that encourage greater participation? And what does that mean? So those are kind of the three guiding questions that we're going to be working through today. All right. So what are the systems of power that are present in classrooms that inhibit or encourage discourse? So before we talk about this, I want us to do an exercise. It's a fairly simple exercise. And I think we can, I'm a firm believer in doing rather than doing first rather than talking about it. I'm also really kind of very interested in neuroscience and its impacts on learning. And one of the things that we are guided by is how our bodies move and how we move through space. So, for example, if you had to point to the future, in which direction is the future to you right now? Where is the future from where you're sitting in your possession point, and where the future is? Okay, yeah. I mean, for most people would say the future is in front of them, right? Where is the past? It's behind you. Right? Why is that? Why can't the future be to the right and the past be to the left? Or why can't the future be down and the past be up? And what is it that we have this idea, and from culture to culture, you'll see that there'll be differences, but largely people will say the future is in front of them, the past is behind them, because it's how we move through the world, right? That that's baked into how we move. If you're thinking about terms for happiness, what are some expressions that we use to say that we're happy, right? There's a spring in my step. I'm feeling up today. There are lots of expressions for happiness that have what direction? Up, right? I was uplifted, right? There are lots of terms for being depressed that have a downward direction, right? Just to say I was feeling down, right? So the way that we describe the world is influenced by how we move through it. And that connects very deeply to the way we think about teaching and learning, right? There's this metaphor baked into how we discuss teaching and learning that's really important for us to think about. And it's that the mind is a container. And so, you can say things, I can only hold so many pieces of information in my head at one time, right? That metaphor, I can only hold, shows that the brain is a container, right? And what do we do with information? We will put it in our head. So if you have an ability to learn languages easily and quickly, you can say, I can pick up languages quickly, or I pick up an instrument quickly, right? There's this physical sense of picking something up and putting it in your brain. I was never really good at math. I couldn't grasp it, right? That sense of holding something, right? It's like, so there's this sense, there are these metaphors that are baked in to our pedagogy and the way we talk about teaching and learning. So it underscores that differential, that power differential, right? That I am the one who is giving you information to put in your head. That language that we use around teaching and learning has already baked into it this power differential that we have to work against if we're going to think about what dialogue could look like within the classroom differently. We have to work against those models of teaching and talking about teaching that make it a banking, what Freire would call a banking model of education, where you're an empty vessel and I'm just making deposits in your head, right? That's very one way, that's just one directional, that's monologuing, where the goal is that we're gonna have a much more dialogical space. All right, so to think about what that space could look like, I want us to, now this is all challenge by choice. If whatever we're gonna do today you're not down with, you don't have to participate, but I would ask that you observe and provide feedback from your vantage point. That would be really instructive to all of us. So if you're gonna participate, yes? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. One of the critiques of Barry's work that I've read is that even though the banking model, he argues against the banking model and attempts to create a more dialogical space, and so a liberatory pedagogy, there's still this presupposition that the teacher or whoever is put into that position of power has to be the catalyst for a kind of liberatory pedagogy,
yes.
which then still of course reifies the unilateral power differential, even if that the use of the unilateral power differential is to subvert the unilateralness, right? I was just curious.
No, that's the inherent contradiction that's based into the work that we do, right? As a teacher, I inherently have more power than the students in the classroom, right? That is the nature of what we do, right? And if we're talking about pedagogy, we're talking about power differentials, right? And it's like I said, it's what we do with that power, it's what we do with that differential that makes the difference in the classroom space. So any educational setting, to think about the word assessment, right? The word assessment from the Greek means to sit beside, right? So there's always going to be someone who is going to be there with more information about a particular subject than the learner in that case has. But if it's a dialogical space, then I'm going to be learning as much from my students in a really authentic way, even if it's just, how am I going to get this kid who has his head on the table to not have their head on the table? Like, that's a massive amount of learning. I might not learn more about my content area, but I might learn a lot more about what that teaching and learning process looks like. So we can't escape that power differential, right? And I hear that critique and I acknowledge that critique, but I think it's also part of what we're trying to figure out how to do, right? How do we have more power and use it in a way that is constructive and humanizing? And that's why I pull a lot from this guy named Auguste Boal, who wrote a book called Theater of the Oppressed, which pulls from the principles of Freire. He's pedagogy of the oppressed. And this is one of the examples that he does. He tries to activate Freirean principles in a way so that we can better understand them. So this is one of the exercises that he does, and it's called the Great Game of Power. So I'm going to ask, if you want to participate, that you come up here and you bring your chair with you. And if we can have 5, 6, 7 people. And the object is that this water bottle, we have to tell the story that this water bottle is going to be the most powerful thing. So we're going to create an image out of just using our chairs and this water bottle. So it has to be clear that this water bottle has the most power. This is the thing that is the most important, most revered, whatever. Okay, so just using chairs, and I know these chairs are expensive and fancy, so we'll have to be careful if we tilt them or put them on their side or whatever. We'll ask for forgiveness. I didn't ask for permission. But this water bottle has to have the most prestige or the most power. Okay, does that make sense? So we get to use the chairs however we want to. We get to put the water bottle within kind of this playing space right here, wherever we want to, but we have to tell the story that this thing has the most power. So we're thinking about, what does power in academia look like? That's what we're trying to create an image of. Not necessarily what we want it to look like, but what does power in academia actually look like for us? Okay? Do we have a couple of volunteers? Great. So just come with your chair, please. If we could have 4-ish more, that would be great. 2, thank you. 3, there's a chair right here. Great. Yeah, you can just grab these chairs. Great. Can we have maybe one more? No? Okay. So here's the water bottle. You get to position the chairs however you want to so that this thing has the most power in the image. Okay? So I'm just putting it there. I'm not saying that's where it goes, but I'm just putting it there for now. All right, so you work it out amongst yourselves as to where that should go. Okay. So, do we agree that this water bottle here, and they're putting themselves in the image as well, I love it. Do we agree that this water bottle is the thing that has the most power in this image? Are there other ways that we can imagine using this space or using these items that we have to give this more power? Yeah.
Well, so like the way it's orientated now, it's obvious that the water has the most power, but just in my opinion and the visual cues, it's like the way the chairs are arranged, the individual that's closest to the water then has more power or more influence than those in the sun.
Mm.
So if you were to say space them all even, then they're all the same.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Can we hold on to that? Because that's a really important idea that we're going to talk about. Great, thank you. Hold on to that. See what I did? I didn't even mean that. Yeah.
What if we put the chairs in a circle and then dump the water on all the chairs?
Oh. So would that show that the water bottle has all the power?
That the knowledge and power is being shared equally.
So we're thinking about what's the image that, like, of reality. Yeah. So that's a great next step. You're on my next slide, man. So we're thinking about the image of reality. Yeah.
That's similar thought, except that I had the water bottle in the center and almost the chairs like bowing down to it, such that all the chairs are focused fully on the water bottle as being the king or the one in power.
Okay, can we see what that would look like? How do you imagine that?
Well, I liked the taller chairs, so I really like that. And then all the chairs like surrounding it, and then I guess I envisioned
Yeah.
That's what I envisioned it as. Do we have any holograms?
Any what?
Holograms?
Well, we have a jacket. I'm curious about this jacket. Everything has meaning, like everything's a signifier, and I'm wondering what the deal is with the jacket.
I thought it was stupid that it's like turning your back on the king, like Louis XIV, like
Oh.
you wouldn't want to be facing the back of the water bottle.
But do you like the idea of it spinning?
I feel like if it was a leadership ability, like if it was a king, he'd get stabbed in the back, Caesar sign.
Yeah. Do we want this out then?
If we're trying to delineate power, yes, but if we're trying to do exclusivity, probably all of these up and that in the center would still demonstrate power.
How do we feel about this? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking so much.
How dare you have ideas?
Well, I suppose I would, if it were even possible, I would put a floating mechanism around like the actual chair with the bottle, but everybody knows the bottle's there. They just don't know exactly where it's looking, kind of like an Panopticon sort of situation where the power is in the middle and everybody is aware that the power is, but they don't necessarily know who's under its power.
Like that?
Yeah, sure. And then that goes in the middle,
And do you want spinning?
Sure.
Then they internalize the water bottle.
Yeah, they've internalized the water bottle. Yes.
But then you'd also have to put walls in between all the different chairs, so everybody's sort of competing with each other, but they don't know what the next person's doing.
So how do we feel about this image? It's a hellscape.
It's very authoritarian.
It's very authoritarian.
Panopticon.
Yeah, it feels like the classroom sometimes. Can we identify what's what in this image? So if this is the image that we're still, kind of landing on, that shows what power in academia looks like, feels like. Can we start naming what some of these things are in this image?
Yeah. I mean, that's being kind of sarcastic, but it's kind of almost like a relationship between a research student and their committee members. The chair of the committee, right?
Yeah.
Basically, they do hold all the power.
The literal chair of the committee, yes. Yeah. So that could be the relationship between the committee members and the doc student, the graduate student. What is this?
That's the living.
I
would say that.
Out of power.
It's the shroud of power.
I would say it's the cloak of uncertainty. You just don't know what to expect.
Okay.
From the ones that hold it over you.
And bureaucracy itself, just how Byzantine
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And who's it protecting?
The water bottle.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost like the code is like the layers of bureaucracy you have to go through to get anything done.
I don't know what you're talking about. This isn't my experience here.
Let me alone.
Interesting. So how do we feel about this image? Does this feel somewhat accurate? Yeah. And what are all these disrupted chairs down here?
Or lowly servants.
Lowly servants? Who would they be?
Anybody at any given point.
Anybody at any given point. So it could be students, It could be custodial staff. It could be people who work in food service here.
Sometimes when you're in front of the class, you're there, but in other situations where you're the student, then you're down here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's flip flops.
Any other images or reflections on this image, rather?
There are also some, there are also so many people who are excluded even from this image. Which is to say, like the chairs themselves could be references to those who aren't allowed or can't afford or aren't healthy enough to get into the classroom itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really important dialogue to have as well.
I have caucuses there today. So it's important to
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting to think about how this image would change in academia across time, such that like in a 101 course, I think this is very much the image that I envision in my head when we talk about power. But when you're in a graduate seminar course, I think the idea is respect at both levels. Such that this isn't the image that I think we see through the range of courses. It's just one image of power.
Right.
And I would argue that by the time at the graduate level, a lot of times there is respect, mutual respect. Now there is still power, but there is, I think, mutual respect. Yeah, and there are different kinds of power, right? A lot of the literature around the power in the classroom will talk about. This would be a good example, I think, of what they call coercive power in the classrooms, like A over B, right? And you have to do what I say because it's the right thing to do, and it's on the syllabus, so you got to do it or not, right? What you're talking about is what they call consensual or persuasive power, right? Like I have to persuade, like if I'm A, I have to persuade B that what I have to offer is actually good for them, and then they will either see that or they won't. And if there's that recognition of yes, I agree with you, then that changes that power relationship, right? On what that could look like, and how that goes. And then it transforms into a third kind of power that they call authority, right? That I still have authority and I'm still driving things, but it's much more collegial sort of relationship, right? So I think this would be a useful thing to carry forward with us in the conversation that we're going to have. Anything else about this image that we want to talk about? I always think it's good to have kind of an embodied sense of what it is that we're talking about, kind of putting theory on its feet in a way. No other changes we want to make? No? Yes? Okay, now we get to think about what do we want the image of the idealized image to be? What do we want a classroom to look like? Okay.
We're just gonna lower it.
Okay.
This work. No, raise it more. Not this one.
And we had the idea of sprinkling all the water on all the chairs, making it rain. So how do we feel about this image? So the question is, what are the steps that we had to take to go from the image that we had to this image? Who made that happen? So I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and talk a little bit, or as a table, what were the steps that you think would be involved in changing the image of reality that we created to this idealized image? All right. So if we can have that conversation, I think we'll be through here with the chairs. So thank you. What do we? So what's the sense of from the conversation so far? What we think would have to happen? I know we're moving through it quickly, but this is only a 50-minute session. So what are the things that would have to happen in order to move from the image of reality to the idealized image that you talked about? Can I give you enough time? Did I interrupt you fast?
I mean, I said that it depends a lot. Well, it's on the instructor to know how much power can be delegate it out, how much, where you're standing in the classroom needs to be, because like, I don't know, Renee said earlier, a one-on-one class is going to be approached a lot differently than a graduate level course, and just the level of understanding of everybody in the room. And that power dynamic even may be able to shift as the course goes on to be more equalized, but.
Why do we think that's so? What has to happen in order for that power to be shared in a way? It has to be given up, first of all, right? Hopefully.
Well, also we said that it would have to be accepted by everyone, because not everyone wants to be in power.
Yeah.
And so we all agree that everyone involved would have to actually buy into it. That yes, we're gonna have equal power. So it's not only the instructor giving up the power, it's also the students and anyone else who's participating accepting and being willing to take on that shared responsibility as well.
Yeah, moving all in this sort of same direction is a really challenging thing to have a class do. And I want to think a little bit about this term empowered together for a minute. It's a little problematic for me, the term empowerment, because I really can't empower anybody to do anything, right? We can create the circumstances where people will assume their own power and act on their own accord. But I find the term empowerment, especially in these kinds of conversations, a little problematic because I don't know if I actually have the authority to make somebody feel like they have more power. They have power, right? That is part of the human condition. It's my responsibility, I think, to create conditions or to listen to how to create conditions where people will tap into their own power and think about the power that they have. But I want us to I just want to throw that out there, that I wonder about that term empowerment, because that gets thrown around a lot. And that's a very banking model term, right? That I will disperse power into the heads of my students, right? Figuring out whether or not that responsibility is going to be accepted is an important thing. I'm wondering about some of the ingredients around the acceptance of that authority. What has to be there for that acceptance to happen?
Confidence.
Okay, confidence? Mm-hmm.
You have to feel safe.
I have to feel safe, absolutely. Yeah.
So I was saying the same thing, you touched a little bit about how it may change over the course of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it can also change over the course of an individual's career and professional development. So I see a lot of early career faculty or new instructors, especially graduate students, who don't feel like they have any power, even though in a classroom setting where they're the instructor, they do have power. And so I think that the fact that there are competing structures of power in academia, in that you can make it even harder to kind of take on the responsibility of being the power in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so there's less willingness to give over some power if you have it in the classroom to give away, and then you feel if you leave the classroom and you don't have power anywhere, you're kind of less likely to relinquish it in that specific environment. So I see more people as they get comfortable, as they get jobs, as they get tenure, like they're more willing to retake risks because they feel more secure in other areas.
Yeah. That I'm thinking about kind of the intersectionality of power and where we have power and where we don't, or where we're allowed to exhibit power and where we're not. I think that's a really important thing to think about.
I was gonna say, I think by and large, it required the group to believe that we are all creators and holders of knowledge that's worth knowing. Because if I'm not made to feel that way, you can keep it out.
That's a really important thing, that the people who are coming into the classroom feel like that they have something to share, they have something to offer. Because of course they do, right? Of course they do. But whether or not they are welcomed into that kind of dialogical process of what is knowledge worth knowing, that's a really important and challenging question to consider. Yeah.
I understand that working with community groups and maybe some stakeholders, but academia students pay to be in the classroom or right? So how would that influence that kind of what is called knowledge co-creation process that students have valued experiences they contribute in the classroom, and also how it connects to experiential learning as well.
So how does the fact that they pay? I'm not sure if I
Yes, so students are paid to be in the room, right? To learn from professor, right? So they actively make the choice, thinking that that would be a good value of their time, value of their money and time, right? So, but telling them that you already have the knowledge that you need, how does that create
Well, it's not that we're saying necessarily that they have the knowledge that they need. Like, I was a German teacher for a long time. And if you come into the classroom and you don't know any German, and I'm the one who knows German, right? I'm not going to say like, your lack of German is great. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you have life experience and you have kind of traditions and rituals and customs and beliefs that should be valued in the classroom. They might not be the normative thoughts and cultural traditions and backgrounds, all that, but that doesn't matter. They should all be welcomed into the space. So it's not that everybody gets a gold star and everybody's a fluent German speaker, even if they can't count to 4. But it's about recognizing that we get to co-create a space where what you bring into the classroom really matters. Because if you are bringing in, I don't know, that your grandmother came from Germany. Like my grandmother came from Germany. And one time when I was learning German, I brought her wooden spoon into class and became a whole lesson plan. And that I had that, I still remember that as a 14-year-old kid. Like that was really important to me. So I think that's the setup. And around paying, students pay for the privilege to engage in the pool of power that we have. Right? They're paying for that's their access, that's their ticket that gets punched so that they can play in our sandbox of power. So even though they're paying for it, and sure, their students are like, I'm paying your salary, I should get an A. Yeah, sure, they could say that, but that's not really how the system is set up. Yeah.
I think your point is really important, right? Because it's also important to remember as educators, and this is one of the problems I have most with grading, is that the college already costs too much, or way too much. So does healthcare, and so does rent, and so does groceries. And one of the problems with the very institutionalized aspect of education and the for-profit model that even this institution has is that folks who come in might be first-generation students who this is their only chance to make a barely middle-class living. And if we fail them, they could be royally effed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so already there's this existential pressure and fear and also cynicism.
Yep.
Because we already know that the classroom itself is inherently racist for of many different reasons, right? So the perversion of the hope and that is, I think, endemic to the let's share power idea that can come across as kind of hollow because we're living in this institution itself that doesn't allow for that kind of hope. It's literally sink or swim. You pass or you fail, and if you fail, you might not be able to get the job you want in 5 years.
What you're saying reminds me of when we had, I forget who said it, but when we were kind of working through those images, somebody said they've all internalized the bottom, right? And I think that's the problem. We can't have that kind of co-creative space. Let's open up the power system. If people have internalized the power and feel like that they therefore can't kind of cross the Rubicon, right? That's not me. I'm not that. I can't share in that way, right? That we get to think that if we think about how people have internalized the oppression and how that lives in their body and how that lives in kind of their own discourses of self, that is a really important thing for us to think about. And I think that's one of the first steps that we have to talk about. That I've got to run through a couple of slides so we can kind of get there. But I think that's one of the things we really have to talk about is how do we name the power systems that exist and be upfront and open about it. To have that conversation with students, I think is an incredibly powerful and important dialogue to have. That classrooms are racist, and I am dipped in the dye of the American culture in which I was raised. And I am doing my best to recognize what that means, especially as a white straight man, middle class guy, kind of hit the jackpot. But I'm trying to understand what that means and how do I use the access and privilege I have in ways to widen that circle. Right, to recognize how it can be other, because I certainly have blind spots. I mean, just the fact that I'm doing this talk is kind of weird in a way, but I get to share my journey, which is what I'm kind of hoping that I'm doing, right? And that's why I said at the beginning, like, I don't have answers. I can just share with you how I've been thinking about these questions. I want to move forward a little bit, and I want to unpack, because I think this is a related term, sharing power equitably. And I'm sure everybody has seen this, right? Has everybody seen this thing, right? Where, this is equality, everybody gets the same size box. Equity is that, like, you get the size box you need. And justice is that, there aren't going to be any limits and all the causes of inequity are going to be addressed. But I find this image kind of problematic in some ways. And I think the first way that I find this problematic is, we get to just look at the size of people. That the fact that everybody is a different height. There's almost like a biological determinism as to who needs help that I find a little problematic. Because it's not the size of the people, it's the size of the obstacle, in my view, that I think is kind of problematic. So in 30 seconds or less, and that's just my opinion, I'm not saying it's wrong, but that's just, when I first saw this years ago, I'm like, oh, that's such a great image. And then the more I've worked with the image, I'm like, oh, that's really problematic. It's instructive, right? It helped me kind of think about it a little bit differently. But over time, I was like, well, what is the image really saying? So on that card that you have in front of you, what I'd love you to do is to draw what you think a better representation of this might be. What could that image look like to really get at what a complicated, challenging mess this really is? Maybe I'll go back and take off the X. Because again, this is also a representation of the banking model of education, right? Like, I get to give handout boxes, which is also a little problematic. So what might be a more useful way to conceptualize this? And I've seen one that has another one that says anarchy, which is no fence. So how can we reconceptualize this image that might be a more useful metaphor to us? Yeah.
I don't think the barrier itself is always equal.
Mm-hmm. So what can we do to the barrier visually to help vary it? Mm-hmm. What?
In a way, the sideline of your soccer pitch serves as a barrier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
There is a line on the ground,
Yeah.
right? And the societal expectation says you as a spectator are not going to walk across that line.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Yeah. Other ways to conceptualize this?
The bench.
Draw a bench?
Yeah, get rid of the fence and do the bench, because you don't even know, like, what if one of those people has a disability, provide a bench where they sit, all at least same height, you have no barrier, you're all good.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to support people. Yeah.
Have people selecting the vantage point that they want to look and feel from.
Yeah, so there's choice. Yeah. Are there other ideas on how to conceptualize this?
I would argue that justice isn't very just. If you've ever tried to watch a soccer game through a chain link fence, like
Yeah.
that's not just,
Yeah.
right, compared to the people who can see over it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Maybe way off base, but I guess, and I don't know how this would be represented, but I guess my question is, has anybody asked the young men who are watching the game if they're watching by choice, or would they rather be playing?
Yeah.
I don't know, visually, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another really important question. Yeah, what are they doing on the sidelines to begin with? Yeah. Yeah. So you can understand kind of what it's going after, right? And what it's trying to help us conceptualize. But even kind of the images have baked in it some of the very challenges that we're trying to overcome within creating open discourse within the classroom. Right? Because if this is as far as we get, then we're still getting to kind of a banking model. I get to take care of you. I will empower you to talk to me. Sort of educational system, right? So I think this is an important thing to work through and to think about. So what are some steps that we could take to encourage greater participation with the power that we have? One of the things that, remember I said, if you can hold on to that idea that you had, where we had the chair here and everything was in a line, and you said the further away you get from the chair, the less power you have. So that's a concept it's called invisible intersectionality, right? That we are manifest that we have lots of parts of us, right? And in this way of thinking about the work, as I am what would be called the prototype, right? The white, straight, middle-class man. So I'm the prototype. And the closer you are to the prototype, the more power you have. And the further away you are from the prototype, the less power you have, right? And I think that's a really important and interesting idea to throw into this space, right? So, maybe a white woman would be next, and then kind of figure out how all that kind of plays out. And then the interesting thing is, who is in the room is also going to affect what parts of themselves people are allowed to reveal. So if there is somebody who's very powerful in the room who's homophobic, somebody who might be gay might try to not share parts, not share that with people, right? So that's what's allowed to be shared when is dictated by who's in the room. So what are some things that we can do if we're trying to have more open dialogue in the classroom? What are some things that we can do as teachers to start working on creating those spaces where dialogue and challenging dialogue can happen?
Sarah kind of
Reorganizing the space if you can, it's not possible all the time.
Reorganizing the space. Yeah, it is amazing how much space plays into this, right? I mean, just the physical spaces, when I'm teaching in big lecture halls, I mean, that's a manifestation of power. Like there's a literal stage sometimes, like I'm the literal sage on the stage, not very sagey, but it's manifest in the physical environment. Yeah, so space is a big one. Humanizing yourself, what does that mean to you?
A lot of people, like when I first got out of undergrad and started working, I just remember being so intimidated by my bosses and district managers and stuff like that. But after a while, you kind of realize that there's people too.
Yeah.
And so when I went back to school, I talked to the professors, and so just trying to be make your students realize that you are a person and that it's okay to be a person because we all make mistakes. We learn better.
Yeah, so share our humanity. Yeah, that people make mistakes. We're all kind of doing the best we can with what we have. Yeah. Other things that we can do to make a difference in the classes that we have.
In regards to humanizing ourselves, I think sometimes it's also not just admitting we make mistakes, but also sharing personal stories. So I remember I was in a class as an undergrad and one of my professors talked about it, interchange between her children and her husband. And it was related to the lecture material, and but at the same time it was like also very humanizing because she has a family at home. And
yeah, personal stories. Yeah. The more intersectional we make ourselves, or the intersectionality that we reveal, A couple of other points. I think one thing that's really important, and we kind of touched on this, but I think this is an essential ingredient, is to name the problem to begin with. Like to not pretend that it doesn't exist, right? Because your students know about the power differential, right? That it is not going to surprise anybody if you lift the veil a little bit, if you pull back the curtain and show the guy, operating in Oz. I think that's not going to shock anybody. And I think that's a really useful thing to do as well, is to just kind of name the truth of the situation, right? That this is what it is. And I am a person who really cares about creating a space where we can work together. And I know that you have been institutionalized in a way that makes that a challenge. But I want to really have this be a place where we can do this. So we're going to work on this together. This is going to be our project this semester, to deinstitutionalize myself as a teacher and hopefully you as a learner, so that we can create a space together that is challenging for you and for me. Because if the classroom is safe for me, when we talk about creating safe spaces, the classroom doesn't necessarily need to be made safe for me. It's already safe for me, right? As a white middle class guy, it's pretty safe for me. So I think we can create safe enough spaces, right? Safe enough where I get to feel like I'm not under threat, but I can also be challenged. And I think those are some of the ideas that I think are really, really important that we start to think about and start to name with students. That idea of naming the world with them so that they can move forward and start to see themselves in the material that we're working through. So we are out of time. So we didn't get through all the slides, but that's okay. But I appreciate you coming and thinking about these topics and ideas with me. I hope there was a couple of things that you're walking away with that you get to think about now that you might not have thought about the same way before. And thank you for sharing your insights and thoughts with me, because I know that is very true for me, that I'll be thinking about this workshop for a while. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Let's thank Peter.